Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The air reeked of scorched metal and plasma charges. Terran crouched behind the twisted hull of a battlecruiser. The wasteland stretched before her, a graveyard of starships, their skeletal remains jutting from cracked earth. Her blue skin, once vibrant as oceans, was dulled with ash and blood. Her fingers tightened around the ancient spear. The weapon hummed with subtle energy, its shaft made of an alloy worth more than star systems. Glyphs along its length pulsed with ethereal light that matched her racing heart. "Last of the Azurians," she whispered, a mantra of survival and vengeance. The ground trembled. The orcs were coming. The orcs appeared over the ridge, massive green-skinned warriors astride beasts that resembled nightmarish hybrids of lizards and wolves. Their armor, crafted from the hulls of conquered ships, gleamed dully in the red light of the setting sun. War cries, guttural and primal, shattered the eerie silence of the wasteland. Terran's muscles tensed as she prepared to fight. She had survived 100 such encounters, but fatigue was taking its toll. Memories flashed unbidden, her father pressing the spear into her hands as their city burned. His final words, "Remember who we were, daughter, not just how we died." She pushed away the memory. No time for grief now. Rising to her feet, she held the spear high, its tip catching the dying sunlight. In her hands, the weapon sang with ancestral power, the last connection to a civilization that had spanned stars. The first orc reached her, its battle axe whistling through the air. Terran ducked and thrust, feeling the satisfying resistance as the spear pierced armor and flesh. A guttural cry escaped the creature's throat as it collapsed. But there were too many. A second orc, this one bearing the distinctive scarring of the warlord's elite guard, slammed into her from the side, sending her sprawling across the rocky ground. The spear, her family's legacy, her people's last relic, slipped from her grasp and skidded across the sand, coming to rest at the feet of a shadow. Pain seared through her side as she struggled to rise. Her vision blurred, the world tilting dangerously. The shadow moved, solidifying into a man, ragged, thin, with eyes that had seen too much horror. His beard was unkempt, his clothes patched and stained, marking him as one of the countless human refugees who scavenged the ruins of the once great interstellar empire. He hesitated only for a moment before reaching down to pick up the spear. "No!" Terran's cry came too late. The man looked at the weapon with puzzlement, then at the advancing orcs, then back at her. His expression shifted to grim determination. Terran forced herself up, blood trickling from a forehead gash. Her molten gold eyes flashed with fury and resignation. "You," she said, her voice carrying despite its softness, "have taken the spear of my ancestors. Now you are my Tarshan, my guardian until death. You cannot refuse." The man's face drained of color as understanding dawned. In the distance, the orcs regrouped, their howls promising death. "What are you talking about?" Kyle's voice cracked from disuse. The spear felt warm in his hands. "I was trying to help." "That weapon is a bond," she said. "You picked it up. Now you're tied to me." She glanced at the approaching orcs. "Leave, and they'll find us both." "I'm not your servant," he snapped. "You're my partner," she corrected coldly. "Refuse, and we both die." The orcs closed in. "Run!" Terran grabbed his wrist. They fled through wreckage. The orcs followed, their laughter like grinding stones. When cornered by scouts, Kyle swung the spear awkwardly, while Terran fought with precision despite her wounds. Afterward, she assessed him with resignation. "You're weak, but you'll learn." Kyle swallowed his pride. "Teach me." Kyle wanted to protest, to defend himself, but the evidence of his inadequacy lay in his pathetic performance during the fight. Instead, he nodded, swallowing his pride. "Then teach me." Night fell as they found shelter in the hollow remains of what had once been a shuttle bay. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of the spear's etchings and the distant fires of the orcs' camps. Kyle examined his wound by the spear's light. "So, what's your name?" he asked, trying to distract himself from the pain. "Terran," she replied, her voice softer than before. "And you?" "Kyle. Kyle Reeves." He paused. "What did you call me earlier? Tar something?" "Tarshan." Terran's eyes reflected the spear's glow, turning them into pools of liquid gold. In my language, it means the one who carries the burden. The guardian of the spear is bound to protect its rightful heir. Kyle's laugh was bitter. Some guardian I am. You had to save me back there. Terran's expression remained serious. The bond is new. The spear has not yet recognized you. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above the weapon's surface. When it does, you will feel it. And then perhaps you will be worthy of the title. Kyle wanted to tell her that he didn't want the title, that he just wanted to go back to his solitary existence. But as the distant howls of the Orcs beasts echoed across the wasteland, he knew that choice was no longer his to make. Days became weeks in the wasteland. Under scorching suns and freezing nights, Terran trained Kyle relentlessly. His hands blistered, then calloused. His body regained strength. The spear is an extension of yourself, she'd say, correcting his stance. You doubt yourself, so you doubt the weapon. Their relationship remained tense but gradually shifted. During quiet nights, they began to share fragments of their past. I had a crew once, Kyle admitted. I failed to protect them when the Orcs came. Terran's rigid demeanor softened slightly. The guilt of surviving, I know it well. My people were the Azurians, she eventually told him. We were scientists and scholars. Vrax, the Orc warlord, came as a diplomat. We welcomed him, shared our knowledge. Her voice hardened. Then he returned with armadas. Our cities fell from the sky. The first true test of their growing bond came when they encountered a group of survivors being hunted by Orcs. Without discussion, they moved as one, Kyle creating a distraction while Terran guided the refugees to safety. When they reunited afterward, something had changed between them. They were no longer simply bound by necessity, but by shared purpose. Their routine was shattered one evening by distant explosions. From atop a downed freighter, they watched a small transport vessel attempt to outrun an Orc patrol. The ship trailed smoke as it maneuvered desperately between rock formations. We should help them, Kyle said, reaching for the spear. Terran grabbed his arm. Too dangerous. We can't watch them die. Kyle pulled away. Isn't that why I'm carrying this? To protect? Indecision flashed across Terran's face before she nodded. We'll need a diversion. They worked quickly, rigging abandoned fuel cells to create timed explosions. As they prepared, Kyle felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Purpose. The rescue succeeded, but barely. Kyle drew the Orcs away, while Terran guided a family of 4, Jared, Elena, and their 2 children, towards safety. When an Orc scout spotted them, only Kyle's timely return prevented disaster. Later, sharing meager rations with the rescued family, they learned valuable information. Jared, a former military engineer, revealed that all warrior caste Orcs had neural implants derived from stolen Azurian technology. My father's work, Terran whispered, face ashen. He developed neural interfaces for medical purposes, to heal brain injuries. Her fingers curled into fists. Now Vrax uses it to create slaves. The family's presence changed their dynamic. Around the children, Terran softened noticeably. She told sanitized stories of Azurian culture, describing floating cities and festivals of light. Kyle found himself watching these moments, seeing glimpses of who she might have been before war consumed her world. As they approached foothills that would lead the family to a rumored sanctuary, they encountered a lone Orc scout. They eliminated it quickly, but not before it activated a distress beacon. They'll be coming, Terran said grimly. Dozens of them. A plan formed. Kyle would create a false trail while Terran guided the family to the radiation boundary that supposedly repelled Orcs. Go with them, Kyle told her that night. I'll lead the Orcs away. Terran stared at him. That's suicide. Maybe. Kyle checked the spear. But you said it yourself. The spear is your people's legacy. It needs to survive. You need to survive. And you. Something new in her voice. Fear for him. Kyle thought of his crew, of his years running, of guilt that had been his only companion. Maybe this is why I survived. To buy time for others, the way I couldn't for my crew. Terran moved closer, searching his face. The spear chose you. It doesn't choose those destined for meaningless sacrifice. She pressed a small metallic disc into his hand, an Azurian neural key that could disrupt Orc implants at close range. This wasn't mere tactical advantage. It was a piece of her past, freely given. Something shifted between them. A bond transformed from forced to chosen. At dawn they parted, the family and Terran heading for the radiation boundary, Kyle moving in the opposite direction, leaving an obvious trail for the orcs to follow. The disc hummed against his chest, warm with unknown energy. They led the orcs on a chase through a labyrinth of ravines, using the terrain to neutralize their superior numbers. The neural key proved invaluable, disrupting the coordination of any orcs that got too close. As sunset approached, Kyle found himself trapped at a ravine's end. The orcs, having learned to keep their distance from the neural key, formed a semicircle around the only exit. He readied the spear, prepared to sell his life dearly. A barrage of energy pulses rained down from above. Terran stood on the cliff edge, wielding a salvaged orc weapon, picking off the attackers with methodical precision. "You came back!" Kyle shouted over the din. Terran slid down the cliff face. "The spear chose both of us. We fight together." They fought through the orc ranks, the spear and neural key working in lethal harmony. When it was over, they stood among the fallen, bloodied but alive. "The family?" Kyle asked, leaning on the spear for support. "Safe, beyond the radiation line." Terran touched a gash on his forehead with surprising gentleness. "Your plan worked." "Our plan worked," he corrected. "We're better together than apart." Something like a smile touched her lips. "Perhaps the spear is wiser than both of us." The encounter changed their training sessions. What had been rote instruction became true collaboration. Terran still corrected his form, but now she also asked for his input, recognizing that his human perspective offered approaches she hadn't considered. They began to develop a fighting style that combined her technical precision with his intuitive adaptability. The spear responded to this evolution, its glyphs glowing brighter during their practice bouts, as if approving of their growing synchronization. Yet their relationship remained tense, strained by circumstance and mutual resentment. Kyle chafed at the invisible chains that bound him to this alien woman, while Terran made no secret of her belief that fate had played a cruel joke in giving her such a weak guardian. Yet as they navigated the dangers of the wasteland together, avoiding orc patrols, foraging for the sparse vegetation that could sustain them, defending against the predators that had adapted to the harsh new environment, a grudging respect began to form. Kyle noticed the shift during their fourth week together. They had established a routine of morning training, with Terran correcting his form as he learned to wield the spear. Her criticisms, once cutting and impatient, had become more measured, even occasionally tinged with approval. "You're adapting faster than I expected," she admitted one morning after he successfully executed a complex defensive maneuver. "Your body remembers what your mind is still learning." "I had a good teacher once," Kyle replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Navigation instructor who believed in muscle memory over theory." Terran nodded, a rare moment of connection passing between them. "My father taught the same way. Knowledge lives in the body as much as the mind." The mention of her father cast a shadow over her face, and she turned away abruptly, ending the session. But that evening, as they huddled in the relative safety of an ancient command center buried half in sand, Terran broke their usual silence. The nightmares had started again. Kyle woke gasping, the screams of his dying crew echoing in his mind. He found Terran already awake, staring at the embers of their small fire. "You call out names in your sleep," she said quietly. "Lena, Marcus, Juno." Kyle's throat tightened. "My crew, my responsibility." Terran studied him. "Tell me about them." The request surprised him, but he spoke, words painful at first, then flowing more freely. He told her about Lena, his navigator with uncanny ability to plot courses through asteroid fields. About Marcus, the engineer who coaxed extra power from engines with curses and determination. About Juno, barely 20, who joined the crew to see the stars and died never seeing home again. "We were running a cargo route in the outer systems when the first reports came in," Kyle said, eyes fixed on dying embers. "Strange ships on the edges of colonized space. At first, no one believed it, just smugglers or pirates with new tech." His hands clenched. "By the time warnings reached us, the orcs had taken 3 sectors. We tried to outrun them, make it to safe zones. Almost did." His voice dropped. "Almost." Terran's voice was gentle when she spoke. "You survived. Why?" The question hit like a physical blow. Luck, I was in the escape pod bay when they boarded, prepping pods for the others. Bitter failure filled his mouth. They never made it. And after? Kyle shrugged, drifted, scavenged, tried to stay alive without knowing why I should bother. He looked up, until a blue-skinned warrior forced me to pick up a spear. The ghost of a smile touched Taryn's lips. Then, as if reaching a decision, she began her own story. My people were known as the Azurians, she said, voice barely audible above the wind. We were explorers, scientists, keepers of knowledge. When the orcs came, led by Varax, we thought we could reason with them. A bitter smile curved her lips. We were wrong. She paused, her golden eyes distant with memory. We called our homeworld Azura Prime, first light in our oldest language. Our cities didn't rest on the ground but floated above it, suspended by gravitic anchors. From above, they looked like constellations scattered across the surface. Kyle listened, transfixed by this glimpse into a lost civilization. We lived for thousands of years in harmony with our environment. Our technology advanced not through conquest but through understanding. We believed knowledge was sacred, not to be hoarded, but shared. Her voice softened. My father was what you might call a high scholar, one of 5 who guided our society. Not rulers, but advisors. Their emblem was the open hand, symbolizing that wisdom must be freely given. She touched the spear reverently. This weapon represents that philosophy. We called it Tir Van, the Staff of Illumination. It's more than a weapon. It's a repository. The alloy contains microscopic lattices that store information, the collective knowledge of generations of scholars. Information? Like a computer? Kyle asked. More complex. It responds to genetic markers in Azurian physiology, sharing its knowledge through direct neural connection. She traced one of the glyphs that spiraled along the shaft. These aren't just decorative. They're mnemonic triggers, activating specific knowledge domains. Historical archives, scientific principles, philosophical teachings, all accessible through meditation while holding the staff. Kyle looked at the weapon with new understanding. So when I hold it, you're carrying the soul of my civilization, Taryn said simply. Though without Azurian genetics, you access only its basic functions, its strength, its durability. The deeper knowledge remains locked away. Is that why the warlord wants it? To access this knowledge? Taryn's expression darkened. Partly, but Vrax also understands symbolism. As long as the staff exists, Azurian culture lives on. He cannot truly claim victory while it remains free. She drew a deep breath. The coming of the orcs was like nothing we had prepared for. We had encountered other species before, established diplomatic relations, cultural exchanges. Our long-range sensors detected their fleet months before arrival. We sent emissaries, offers of friendship. Her voice turned hollow. Our emissaries never returned. Instead, Vrax himself came, requesting to study our culture. We welcomed him, believing his interest was genuine. It was a reconnaissance mission, Kyle guessed. Taryn nodded grimly. For 3 cycles of our moons, he walked among us, asking questions about our defenses, our power systems, our population centers. We answered freely, believing in open exchange. Her fists clenched. On the last day of his visit, he requested a private audience with the high scholars. My father invited him to our home, a great honor. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I was completing my studies at the Academy of Applied Sciences when the shields failed. From the Academy's observation deck, I watched as the first wave of orc warships descended on our floating cities. Their weapons, crude but effective, targeted our gravitic anchors. One by one, our cities fell from the sky. You survived, Kyle said softly. I survived because I wasn't home. The pain in her voice was raw. When I reached our family quarters, everything was in ruins. My father was gravely wounded, but he had secured the staff. His last act was to entrust it to me, to perform the rite of succession. What's that? An ancient ceremony. The bearer places their hands on the successor, transferring not just the physical weapon, but the responsibility it represents. Her fingers unconsciously moved to her heart. The staff bearer recites, "Through light and darkness, through wisdom and ignorance, the knowledge of our people flows through me to you. Carry it well." She fell silent, lost in memory. Kyle waited, sensing there was more she needed to say. Kyle, surprised by this sudden openness, remained silent, encouraging her to continue. Vrax was once considered a scholar among his kind, unusual for orcs, who value physical strength above all. He came to us seeking knowledge. Her voice hardened. What we didn't realize was the purpose behind his questions. He didn't seek understanding. He sought power. She drew a deep breath. The warlord believes in the superiority of strength. To him, any race that cannot defend itself deserves extinction. But it's more than that. He's obsessed with proving that knowledge itself is merely a tool for the strong to dominate the weak. Her fingers traced the glyphs on the spear's shaft, illuminating symbols that pulsed in response to her touch. This weapon belonged to my father, and his father before him. It was forged from an alloy created in the heart of a dying star, imbued with the collective knowledge and power of my people. She paused, meeting Kyle's eyes. The spear is more than a weapon. It's the antithesis of everything Vrax believes. It channels power through wisdom, not brute force. That's why he hunts me so relentlessly. The spear represents a challenge to his entire worldview. She closed her eyes, pain etching lines around her mouth. I swore to find the warlord, to destroy him as he destroyed my world. But now, she gestured helplessly at the spear in Kyle's hands. For the first time, Kyle saw beyond her hardened exterior to the wounded soul beneath. Her loss mirrored his own. The crew of the Horizon Dancer had been more than employees. They had been family. Their deaths weighed on him daily, a burden of guilt and failure. We'll find him, Kyle said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. Together. Taryn looked up, skepticism clear in her golden eyes. But before she could respond, a distant explosion shattered the night stillness. They moved to the command center's broken viewport. In the valley below, a group of humanoid figures ran desperately from pursuing orc riders. The fugitives, a mix of species from across the fallen empire, were clearly exhausted, some carrying children or supporting wounded comrades. We have to help them, Kyle said, the spear already in his hands. Taryn's expression was guarded. Too risky. Kyle met her gaze steadily. Isn't this what your spear is for? To protect the weak? Something shifted in Taryn's eyes, surprise followed by a reluctant admiration. She nodded. The rescue was chaotic. Kyle, using the terrain to his advantage, created a distraction, drawing half the orc patrol away from the refugees. The spear felt different in his hands now, more responsive, almost eager. He managed to fell one orc before retreating, leading the others on a wild chase through the ruins. Meanwhile, Taryn guided the refugees to safety, her knowledge of orc tracking methods allowing her to cover their trails. When she and Kyle finally rendezvoused at their predetermined meeting point, the gratitude of the survivors was palpable. You saved us, said an elderly woman, her species unknown to Kyle, her skin pallid and translucent. The orcs have been hunting us for days. Among the group was a young man with scaled skin and nervous eyes. His name was Drell, and he claimed to have been a navigator on a trading vessel before the invasion. We heard rumors of resistance groups forming in the old mining sectors, places the orcs avoid because of radiation. Hope, long dormant, flickered in Kyle's chest. Other survivors organized and fighting back. It seemed too good to be true, but their newfound optimism was short-lived. During the night, while Kyle took his turn on watch, he noticed Drell slipping away from the camp. Suspicious, he followed, only to witness the navigator meeting with an orc scout, exchanging information for some kind of narcotic. Before Kyle could intervene, the traitor had revealed their location. He raced back to warn the others, but it was too late. The orc patrol descended upon them with overwhelming force. In the chaotic battle that followed, Taryn fought with savage grace, but a brutal blow from an orc warhammer sent her crashing against a rock wall. Kyle heard the sickening crack of bone and saw her collapse, blood pooling beneath her blue-tinged skin. Rage unlike anything he had ever known surged through him. The spear in his hands pulsed with answering energy, its glyphs blazing like captured stars. He moved without thinking, the weapon now truly an extension of his body, cutting through the orcs with deadly precision. But there were too many. Gathering Taryn's limp form in his arms, Kyle made a desperate retreat, the surviving refugees scattering in all directions. The spear, strapped to his back, left a trail of light as he ran, carrying his wounded companion through the night. 3 days of desperate flight had taken their toll. Kyle's legs felt like lead, his shoulders burned from carrying Terran, and the constant vigilance had left his nerves frayed. The orcs were relentless, their trackers following signs invisible to Kyle's untrained eye. Terran drifted in and out of consciousness, her normally vibrant blue skin taking on a worrying grayish tinge. The wound in her side had stopped bleeding, but infection was setting in, evident in the heat radiating from her body and the sheen of sweat on her brow. They found temporary sanctuary in an abandoned mining complex, its entrance half collapsed and hidden behind a cascade of rust-colored vines. The interior was a maze of tunnels and chambers, evidence of extensive excavation operations from before the war. Most importantly, the thick walls blocked their heat signatures, providing a precious respite from the orc trackers. Kyle settled Terran on a makeshift bed of salvaged padding from old mining suits. In the dim emergency lighting that still functioned in parts of the complex, her face looked hollow, her breathing shallow. "We need antibiotics," Kyle muttered, searching through the complex abandoned first aid stations. Most had been looted long ago, but in a forgotten storage locker, he found a dusty medical kit with some basic supplies. Cleaning and dressing Terran's wound, Kyle felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him. When had this alien woman, who had forced him into servitude, become someone he genuinely cared about? Terran stirred, her golden eyes opening. "Where?" "Mining complex. We're safe for now." Kyle helped her sip from their dwindling water supply. "The orcs are still out there, but they haven't found this place yet." Terran tried to sit up, wincing with the effort. "We can't stay. The warlord." She trailed off, her strength failing. "The warlord will wait," Kyle said firmly. "You need to heal." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Heal for what? To continue running?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Maybe it's all pointless. Maybe we are just delaying the inevitable." The defeat in her tone shocked Kyle more than any physical wound could have. This was Terran, fierce, determined, unbreakable Terran, speaking of surrender. "You won't give up," he said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "Because I won't give up. We will make it. Together." Something flickered in Terran's eyes, surprise followed by a fragile hope. She reached out, her fingers brushing his arm. "You've changed, Kyle Reeves." The moment was interrupted by a distant rumble that shook dust from the ceiling. The orcs had found them. "We need a plan," Kyle said, retrieving the spear from where it leaned against the wall. As his fingers closed around it, a strange sensation traveled up his arm, a warmth that spread through his chest, as if the weapon were greeting him like an old friend. "The spear," Terran said, noticing his expression. "It's responding to you." Kyle nodded, feeling the connection deepen. It's like it knows what I'm thinking before I do." Terran's lips curved in a small smile. "The spear feels its wielder. It bonds not just with the body, but with the spirit." Her expression grew serious. "It's connected to me by blood, but now it recognizes you as well. This is rare, Kyle. It means you're worthy." She fixed him with an intense gaze. "Among my people, such a dual bond would be celebrated with the ritual of shared purpose. Tevalan Shima. It acknowledges that the staff has chosen two guardians with complementary strengths." "What does this ritual involve?" Kyle asked, curious despite the dire circumstances. "The bearers would stand back to back, the staff held between them. They would recite the oath of guardianship together, each in their native tongue, creating harmony from difference." A shadow of sorrow crossed her face. "The ritual would normally be witnessed by the circle of elders, followed by 7 days of reflection and celebration." "We're short a few elders," Kyle said, attempting to lighten the moment. An unexpected laugh escaped Terran. "True, but the meaning remains. The staff has recognized that neither of us alone can fulfill its purpose. Together we form something new, what my people called Chimera, complementary forces." The pride that swelled in Kyle's chest was tempered by fear. What if this newfound connection wasn't enough? What if he still failed her? There was no time for doubt. The complex old security systems gave them a partial view of the outside, showing orc war parties converging on their position. The main entrance wouldn't hold for long. "We use the mine against them," Kyle said, an idea forming. "These tunnels are a maze, and some sections still have operational defensive measures. We can set traps, funnel them into choke points." Taryn nodded, her tactical mind engaging despite her weakness. "The northern section has automated laser grids. If we can reactivate them..." Working together, they prepared their defense. Kyle rigged collapses in strategic tunnels while Taryn, propped against a console, rewired the complex's ancient security systems. Her knowledge of pre-war technology proved invaluable, bringing dormant systems back to life one by one. As they worked, Kyle shared stories of his days as a pilot, of the freedom of space, and the worlds he had visited. Taryn spoke of Azurian culture, their art, their music, their philosophy of balance and harmony. In those hours, as death closed in around them, they found moments of genuine connection. When the Orcs breached the outer defenses, the trap was sprung. Automated turrets cut down the first wave, while strategically collapsed tunnels forced the survivors into narrow corridors where ancient laser grids awaited. Kyle, spear in hand, defended the command center where Taryn continued to orchestrate their electronic defenses. The spear moved with him as if it had always been his, its tip cutting through Orc armor with impossible ease. Each thrust, each parry felt natural, guided by some instinct that transcended conscious thought. But the Orcs' numbers seemed endless. For each one that fell, two more took its place, advancing relentlessly through the complex. And then, in a moment that froze Kyle's blood, a new figure appeared on the security monitors. He was massive, towering over the other Orcs, his green skin almost black with ritual scarification. Armor made from the fused components of starship hulls encased his broad form, and a weapon that resembled a cross between a battle axe and a plasma cutter glowed with ominous energy in his grasp. A crown of twisted metal sat upon his hairless head, symbols of conquered worlds hanging from its spikes. Most striking was a glowing blue crystal embedded in his chest plate, unmistakably Azurian technology, pulsing with stolen power. "The Warlord," Taryn whispered, her face pale. "Vrax the Destroyer." Recognition flashed in her eyes, followed by a hatred so intense it transformed her features. "He wears the heart of Azuria, a power source from our central archive. My father died protecting it." Kyle studied the imposing figure on the screen. "You know him personally?" Taryn's voice turned hollow. "Before the invasion, he came to our world as an envoy. We welcomed him, shared our knowledge freely." Her fingers tightened into fists. "He studied our defenses, learned our weaknesses. When he returned, it was with armadas." The betrayal in her voice was raw, personal. This wasn't just about the destruction of her species. It was about broken trust, about knowledge perverted for conquest. Kyle's grip on the spear tightened. "Then we fight." Taryn shook her head. "Not like this. Not when I can barely stand." She looked at him, the command center's emergency lights reflecting in her golden eyes. "You need to go. Take the spear and escape through the maintenance shafts. I'll hold them here." "No." The word was simple, final. "We leave together, or we die together." The certainty in his voice made her pause. Weeks ago, he had been a reluctant guardian, bound by a tradition he didn't believe in. Now he stood before her, spear in hand, eyes steady with resolve. Somewhere along their brutal journey, his commitment had transformed from obligation to choice. The battle that followed would later become legend among the scattered survivors of the fallen empire. Kyle, channeling power through the ancient spear, faced the warlord in the central chamber of the mining complex. The Orc leader's laughter boomed off the walls as he circled the human, clearly savoring the moment. "You fight well for prey," Vrax said, his voice deep and distorted by his helmet's speakers. "But you are still prey." His eyes shifted to Taryn, who stood braced against a wall. "The last Azurian, how fitting that you should witness the final triumph of strength over knowledge." He tapped the glowing crystal in his chest plate. "Your people's precious wisdom, harnessed for conquest, as all things should be." Kyle didn't waste breath on a response, but he didn't attack either, a surprise that momentarily confused the warlord. Instead, Kyle's eyes scanned the chamber, taking in the structural supports, the ancient mining equipment, the exposed power conduits. Terran had taught him that victory wasn't always about who struck hardest, but who understood the battlefield best. The spear belongs with the strong, Vrax continued, mistaking Kyle's assessment for hesitation. Give it to me now, and your death will be quick. Kyle shifted his stance subtly, stepping onto a particular section of floor, one that Terran had identified during their hasty planning as covering an old maintenance shaft. He needed to maneuver Vrax into position. The spear is just metal and energy, Kyle replied, like your fancy chess piece. Just stolen technology you don't understand. The taunt had its intended effect. Vrax roared, charging forward with unexpected speed. Kyle sidestepped at the last moment, using the spear to guide rather than block the warlord's momentum. The massive orc crashed into a control panel, sending sparks flying. You know what the difference is between us? Kyle continued, circling to keep Vrax's attention. I know when to let others be stronger. At that signal, Terran activated her part of the plan. Using the last of her strength, she rerouted power from the complex's emergency systems into the ancient security grid. Laser defenses designed to cut through rock suddenly flickered to life, catching Vrax in a crossfire. The warlord howled as beams seared through his armor, but the crystal in his chest flared in response. Energy from the heart of Azuria created a partial shield, deflecting the worst of the assault. Clever, Vrax growled, advancing again, using machines instead of muscle. His axe-like weapon arced through the air. But machines can be broken, Kyle parried, the impact sending shockwaves up his arms. Each clash threatened to tear the spear from his grasp, but he wasn't fighting to win, he was fighting to position. Each step backward was calculated, drawing Vrax toward the center of the chamber, above the maintenance shaft. Terran, seeing the plan unfold, dragged herself to a secondary control station. Her fingers danced across the ancient interface, bypassing safety protocols. Warning lights flashed as she overrode the structural integrity systems. Vrax sensed the trap too late. As he lunged for a killing blow, the floor beneath him groaned. Kyle dodged not away but toward him, rolling past the warlord and driving the spear into the floor controls. The ancient weapon pierced the metal, connecting with the subsystems beneath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then with a shriek of tearing metal, the floor gave way. Vrax plummeted into the darkness below, his roar of rage echoing up the shaft. But he wasn't finished. The sound of his armor scraping against the shaft walls indicated he was slowing his fall. The supports, Terran shouted. The main columns. Kyle understood immediately. The complex's support structure, 4 massive columns, could be collapsed to seal the shaft, but they were reinforced with the same alloys as starship hulls, nearly impervious to conventional weapons. Nearly, but not entirely. The spear in his hands hummed with energy, responding to his desperate need. Terran had told him that the weapon was forged to channel the wielder's will, but he'd never felt it as clearly as now. Racing to the first column, he drove the spear into a junction point that Terran's engineer's eye had identified as a weakness. The metal resisted, then yielded. Structural warnings blared throughout the complex as the first column failed. Kyle moved to the second, then the third, the spear cutting through impossible materials as if they were cloth. From below, the sounds of Vrax climbing grew louder. The warlord was nearly at the edge, his growls promising vengeance. The fourth column proved the most difficult. As Kyle approached it, the spear suddenly dimmed, its energy seemingly depleted. Vrax's massive hand appeared at the edge of the shaft, metal fingers digging into the floor plating. The heart, Terran called, struggling to her feet. It's draining the spear. The connection between Azurian technologies, the crystal in Vrax's chest, was somehow leaching power from the spear. Kyle could feel it, a pulling sensation as if the weapon were being tugged from his grasp by invisible forces. In desperation, he looked to Terran. Their eyes met across the chamber, a wordless communication passing between them. She nodded once, understanding. Together, she shouted, stumbling toward him. As Vrax pulled himself further from the shaft, Kyle tossed the spear to Terran. The warlord's eyes tracked the weapon, momentarily distracted from his climb. Terran caught it, the weapon flaring to brilliant life in her hands. With perfect form, she drove it into the final column, then collapsed from the effort. Kyle didn't hesitate. While Vrax's attention was on Terran and the spear, he lunged for the exposed heart of Azuria in the warlord's chest plate. His fingers closed around the crystal, feeling it burn against his skin. With a roar of his own, he wrenched it free. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Energy discharged in all directions as the connection between the stolen Azurian technology and its wielder was severed. Vrax's armor systems failed, the weight suddenly becoming dead metal. The warlord slipped, hanging by one hand over the abyss. "You think this ends me?" Vrax snarled, his exposed face contorted with hatred. "Others will rise. Strength always rises." Kyle looked down at him, the heart of Azuria pulsing in his blistered palm. "Maybe, but today, knowledge wins." He stepped on the warlord's fingers, watching dispassionately as the massive orc lost his grip and plummeted into the darkness. Then he staggered to Terran's side, the complex shuddering around them as the final column began to fail. The battle that followed would later become legend among the scattered survivors of the fallen empire. Kyle, channeling power through the ancient spear, faced the warlord in the central chamber of the mining complex. The orc leader's laughter boomed off the walls as he circled the human, clearly savoring the moment. Through blurred vision, he saw Terran leap onto the warlord's back, driving some kind of mining tool into the joint of his armor. The orc thrashed, trying to dislodge her, crashing into support columns in his rage. The complex, damaged by battle and already structurally compromised, began to collapse. Warning klaxons blared as automated systems detected critical failures. The remaining orcs retreated in disarray, leaving their wounded leader behind. Kyle dragged himself to his feet, retrieving the spear from where it had fallen. The warlord, wounded but still dangerous, charged at him with mindless fury. Kyle stood his ground, the spear leveled. At the last moment, he sidestepped, using the orc's momentum to guide the spear deeper into the wound Terran had created. The warlord fell, green blood pooling beneath his massive form. His dying words were lost in the rumble of the collapsing complex. Kyle staggered to Terran, who had slumped against a wall, fresh blood staining her side. "We need to go," he said, helping her to her feet. "This whole place is coming down." They made their way through falling debris and crumbling corridors, each step a battle against exhaustion and pain. When a support beam crashed down, Kyle pushed Terran clear but couldn't save himself. The crushing weight pinned his legs, sending waves of agony through his body. "Leave me," he gasped. "Get out while you can." Terran looked at him, tears forming in her golden eyes, the first he had ever seen her shed. "No," she said, echoing his earlier words. "We leave together, or we die together." With strength born of desperation, she managed to lift the beam just enough for Kyle to drag himself free. His legs were shattered, useless, but Terran lifted him onto her back, the spear clutched in his hand as they made their final push toward daylight. They emerged from the collapsing mine into the harsh glare of the wasteland sun, coughing up dust and blood. Behind them, the entrance sealed itself with a final, thunderous cave-in, burying the warlord in what would become his tomb. Terran stumbled forward a few more steps before her strength gave out. She collapsed, Kyle's weight bearing her down, both of them too exhausted to move further. They lay there on the scorched earth, the spear between them, its light dimmed but not extinguished. "We did it," Kyle whispered, his voice raw from dust and exertion. "We actually did it." Terran's laugh was weak but genuine. "We didn't kill all the orcs. The warlord might even survive, trapped down there. But we won today." Kyle reached out, his fingers finding hers. "And that's enough for now." Time seemed to stand still as they lay there, hovering on the edge of consciousness. Kyle's legs throbbed with a pain so intense it had become almost abstract, a problem belonging to someone else. Terran's breathing was shallow, each inhale seeming to require conscious effort. When Kyle next opened his eyes, the sun had moved across the sky. Terran was sitting beside him, her wounds crudely bandaged with strips torn from her own clothing. She had fashioned a splint for his legs using metal fragments and cloth ties. "You should have left," Kyle said, his throat parched. "Saved yourself." Terran shook her head, a new softness in her expression. "You are my Tarshan, but more than that." She hesitated, searching for words. "You have become a true friend, Kyle Reeves, perhaps the only one I have left in this ruined world." The admission cost her, he could tell. For Terran, vulnerability was harder to bear than physical pain. Yet she had given him this truth, this piece of herself. What now, he asked, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were alive but stranded in the wasteland, both seriously injured, with limited supplies and no immediate hope of rescue. Terran looked to the horizon, where dust clouds hinted at distant movement. We survive, we heal, and then we continue the fight. The fight? Kyle's laugh was cut short by a stab of pain. Terran, look at us. We can barely stand, let alone fight. The orcs are still out there, she said, her voice growing stronger. Without the warlord, they may fragment, fighting among themselves for dominance. But that makes them no less dangerous to the survivors of this world. Her golden eyes met his. And I am still the last of the Azurians. I still have a duty to the memory of my people, to ensure their knowledge isn't lost forever. She placed her hand on the spear, its glyphs pulsing in response to her touch. There's a ritual among my people. Tir Kalavan, the awakening of the staff. It's performed only in times of greatest need, when knowledge must be preserved at all costs. Her voice took on a formal cadence, as if reciting from memory. The ritual requires a deep meditative state in the presence of both the hereditary bearer and the chosen guardian. Chosen guardian? Kyle asked. You mean me? Terran nodded. The staff has accepted you. In the eyes of my ancestors, you are now as much its keeper as I am. Different roles, but equal importance. What does this ritual do? It unlocks the staff's full memory lattice, creating a complete neural imprint that can be transferred to suitable repositories. Her expression grew solemn. It's how my people preserved our most precious knowledge during previous catastrophes. We would transfer the staff's contents to crystalline matrices, creating backups that could eventually restore our civilization. And you think we can do this? Kyle's skepticism was evident. We're hiding in ruins, barely surviving day to day. Not now, Terran admitted, but someday, when we've gathered enough allies, when we've found a safe haven, the knowledge within the staff, scientific understanding, cultural records, technological specifications, could help rebuild not just Azurian society, but all the worlds devastated by the orcs. Kyle considered this. The spear, no, the staff, was more than a weapon or a symbol. It was a seed from which a new future might grow. So we're not just fighting for survival or revenge, he said slowly. We're fighting for rebirth. A rare, genuine smile transformed Terran's face. Precisely. My father used to say, knowledge preserved is hope extended. Her smile faded. That's why Vrax targeted our archives first. Why his forces hunted down our scholars with such precision. He understood that to truly destroy us, he had to erase our knowledge. Tell me about the orcs, Kyle said. Not just Vrax, their civilization. Terran's expression turned contemplative. Their homeworld is Drakkar, a harsh planet with extreme gravity and toxic atmosphere. It shaped them into what they are, physically powerful, resistant to pain, survivors of conditions that would kill most species. Their society is built around Krevda, proving strength. Every orc must regularly demonstrate their worth through combat or conquest. Those who fail are relegated to lower castes or executed. It creates a culture driven toward expansion and warfare. She picked up a stick, drawing symbols in the dust. Their writing has no symbols for concepts like cooperation or peace. The closest approximation is submission, the opposite of strength. And Vrax? How did he become warlord? Unlike most orc leaders who rise through physical combat, Vrax combined strength with cunning. He studied the peoples he intended to conquer, learning their weaknesses before striking. She continued, her voice taking on the rhythm of a historian. When the orcs first achieved spaceflight, they encountered a trading species called the Zellarians, peaceful, technologically advanced. Rather than immediately attacking, Vrax proposed an exchange. Orc protection for Zellarian technology. The Zellarians agreed, not understanding what protection meant in orc culture. Within a decade, the Zellarians were enslaved, their technology repurposed for warfare. Vrax used this pattern repeatedly, false diplomacy followed by strategic betrayal. Each conquered species added to the orcs' technological arsenal while reinforcing Vrax's position as supreme warlord. The invasion of our sector wasn't random. Kyle realized. It was methodical. Terran nodded grimly. The first signal came when the Centauri colonies went silent. By the time Central authorities recognized the pattern, 3 sectors had already fallen. The response was fragmented. Some systems tried to fight, others negotiated, still others attempted to hide. None succeeded. Kyle remembered those chaotic early days, the conflicting reports, the refugee ships, the desperate military communiques. We thought it was just another border skirmish at first, he said quietly. By the time we understood the scale of the invasion, it was too late. The Orcs targeted communication networks first, Terran explained. Isolated planets and stations were easier to conquer. Then they went after military installations, shipyards, fuel depots, crippling any organized response. Only then did they begin planetary invasions, starting with the least defended worlds. A 3-phase strategy, Kyle mused. Cut off, disable, consume. Yes, and they adapted their tactics for each target. Densely populated worlds faced orbital bombardment. Resource-rich planets saw selective strikes to capture infrastructure intact. Cultural centers like Azura Prime, her voice faltered. Those they destroyed completely, ensuring no symbol of resistance remained. The scope of the invasion's planning was staggering. Not the mindless rampage Kyle had imagined, but a calculated campaign of conquest. It made their current struggle seem even more hopeless, yet somehow more important. They weren't just fighting brutal warriors, they were opposing a system designed to crush all resistance. There must have been others who fought back, Kyle said. We can't be the only ones. A spark lit in Terran's eyes. We aren't. There are rumors of resistance cells on occupied worlds, pirates attacking Orc supply lines, even some military units that escaped the initial onslaught, operating from hidden bases. Could we find them? Perhaps. Terran's voice held cautious hope. With the warlord weakened or dead, there may be an opportunity to unite these scattered forces. The staff could serve as a beacon, a symbol that organized resistance is possible. Kyle looked at the spear lying between them, its glyphs pulsing gently in the darkness. What he had once seen as a burden, an unwanted obligation, now represented something more. A connection to a lost civilization, a repository of invaluable knowledge, and perhaps a key to humanity's survival. Then we keep fighting, he said with quiet determination. Not just for ourselves, but for everything the Orcs tried to destroy. Terran reached across the space between them, her blue fingers briefly touching his hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks before. Together, she agreed. In the distance beyond the horizon, the green-skinned conquerors prepared their next strike, unaware that within the ruins of the world they thought broken, resistance was taking root. Kyle looked at the spear, now lying across his lap. Its surface caught the sunlight, sending prisms dancing across the barren ground. And I'm still bound to you, aren't I? Your unwilling guardian. A small smile curved Terran's lips. Are you still unwilling, Kyle Reeves? He considered the question seriously. The bond that had begun as a curse, an unwanted obligation, had transformed into something else entirely. Through shared hardship and battle, through moments of connection and mutual protection, it had become a choice. No, he said finally, not unwilling anymore. They recovered in a hidden settlement with salvaged medical technology. Kyle's legs needed grafted supports. Terran's Azurian physiology proved resilient. During this enforced stillness, their connection deepened beyond words. You could have left me, Kyle said as Terran changed his bandages. There was a time I would have, she admitted, when you were just an obligation. And now? Now you are Tar-Shan in truth, she said, vulnerability in her golden eyes. My people had a saying, the spear chooses wisely what the heart denies. Troubling news reached them. Vrax had survived, his body increasingly fused with the Azurian technology. When healed enough, they ventured back into the wasteland, seeking to finish what they'd started. Then came the moment that changed everything. At the ruins of an Orc fortress, the spear in Kyle's hands suddenly blazed with light. Its power now flowed from him rather than Terran. Simultaneously, her eyes widened with revelation. This isn't the end, she whispered. All this time, the spear is a key. My people weren't destroyed. They sealed themselves away. Their knowledge, their essence, lives within the spear. The morning sun rose over the wasteland, painting the sky in hues of deep crimson and gold. Kyle adjusted the pack on his shoulders, feeling the reassuring weight of the supplies they had managed to salvage. The spear rested securely on his back, its once mysterious glyphs now familiar. Taryn stood beside him, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. Her wounds had begun to heal, and the strength in her stance had returned. For the first time in weeks, she no longer carried the weight of vengeance alone. "We made it," Kyle said, his voice quiet but firm. Taryn exhaled slowly. "Yes, the warlord is gone. His forces will crumble without him." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind whispering through the ruins around them. The past weeks had been a relentless struggle, a fight for survival that had pushed them beyond what either of them thought possible. "What now?" Kyle asked. "You still need to find the remnants of your people?" Taryn nodded. "I do. The knowledge of the Azurians cannot be lost forever. But this," she glanced at him, her gaze lingering on the spear. "This is where our paths separate." Kyle studied her carefully. He had never believed in fate, never thought he would be part of something greater than himself. Yet here he was, standing at the crossroads of history, bound to a cause that had become his own. "I guess this is where I say goodbye then," he said. Taryn tilted her head slightly. "Goodbyes are for those who never meet again, and I don't believe that's our fate." She stepped forward and, in a rare moment of open emotion, placed a hand on his arm. "You are no longer just a guardian, Kyle Reeves. You are a keeper of something greater than either of us." Kyle smirked. "And here I thought I was just a guy who picked up the wrong weapon." Taryn actually smiled. Small, fleeting, but real. The right weapon in the right hands. She took a step back, then another. The wind picked up, swirling dust between them as she turned toward the horizon. "May your path be clear, Tarshan," she said, using the ancient title one last time. Kyle watched her go, knowing that whatever awaited her, she would face it with the same unwavering resolve that had brought them this far. When she disappeared over the ridge, he turned in the opposite direction. The world was still broken, but it was not beyond saving. With one final glance at the rising sun, Kyle tightened his grip on the spear and walked forward, leaving the past behind. His journey had only just begun.